There's a question that comes up every time an artist is in headlines for controversy. Can you still love the art even though you hate what the artist did? And is your answer different depending on if they're dead or alive, sorry or unremorseful, convicted or merely accused? This question feels especially urgent right now. Just last week, hip-hop pioneer Afrika Bambaataa passed away at the age of 68. He was a fundamental figure, the DJ and producer whose block parties in the South Bronx helped give rise to hip-hop, and whose 1982 record, Planet Rock, became a cultural landmark for the genre. But his legacy is deeply complicated. In 2025, he lost a child sexual abuse civil case by default after failing to appear in court, with an anonymous plaintiff alleging that the abuse began when he was just 12 years old. So now we're left with the same unresolved question. How do we honor the art while grappling with the artists? As a fan of many art forms, I've been wrestling with this for many years. As someone who still watches old Chris Benoit matches, even knowing what he did, as someone who grew up loving Rocky but has to reconcile that with the allegations against Sylvester Stallone, and someone who enjoyed R.Kelly's Trapped in the Closet, being disgusted by his abuse. The way I see it, the question is usually asked wrong. People want a yes or no, but that's not how it works. For me, it's a spectrum. I want to be clear, this is my spectrum, not yours. I am not here to tell you what art to consume. You may disagree, that's fine. But let me say something else. Separating the art from the artist is not an excuse. It does not erase what they did. You can separate and still hold someone accountable. Those earlier examples were from wrestling and movies, but for the rest of this video, I'll be talking about music artists specifically because that's where my deepest conflict lives. In this video, I'll walk you through 8 artists. Some I can easily separate from their actions. Some I cannot. And a few fall somewhere in between. Before I show you my spectrum, let me explain to you the different factors that actually go into it. I have 2 primary questions that I ask myself. First, what is the nature of the action? Not every action is a crime. Some are legal but still make you uncomfortable. A shift in politics, a cruel statement, a contradiction of the artist's own image. That hypocrisy can be just as hard to separate from as a criminal act. The second question, does the art mirror the action? If the lyrics describe the act, if the song itself is part of what they did, separation becomes almost impossible. There are definitely other factors that still matter to me. Whether the artist is dead or alive, whether they still profit, whether there's still a pattern or if it was a single incident, and most of all, my own personal connection to the music. They all add weight. But I always come back to these 2 main questions. On one side of my spectrum, are artists whose actions are mostly opinions, contradictions, or just words. They might be hypocritical, but no one was directly harmed. On the other side, are artists whose actions themselves are what we're judging. Assault, abuse, hate speech, the list goes on. There's also what I call non-negotiable factors. An artist's cultural impact, for example. Some artists change music forever. That impact doesn't excuse anything. But it does make separation a little more painful because you're not just losing a person, you're losing art that shaped the world. This applies whether we're talking about opinions or actions. Then there are miscellaneous factors that don't really fit neatly anywhere. What if the artist was a part of a group? Does listening to the group feel different from listening to the solo artist? What if the art was created before the action became public? Does that earlier work deserve a different judgment? I don't have hard rules for these, but I do keep them in mind. None of these factors really give me a clean yes or no. They give me questions to ask myself every time I hit play. So now we're going to actually take a look at my visual spectrum of separating the art from the artist. On here, we have J. Cole all the way to R.Kelly. And the way that this is structured is easiest to separate the art from the artist to hardest to separate from the art from the artist. And reminder, this is my personal spectrum. So if you disagree, that's fine, but this is how I see things for me. The first artist that we'll be talking about today is J. Cole. J. Cole is often considered one of the most thought-provoking and introspective artists in the modern era of hip-hop. However, he claims that he doesn't read books. Yet, his music is full of sharp critiques of other artists, politics, society. I'm not saying that you have to read books in order to have these topics present in your music, but for J. Cole to have these subjects at the forefront of most of his music, it does feel a little weird to be dismissive of reading books. That contradiction has always felt a little off to me, but the real hypocrisy comes from the time during the Drake versus Kendrick beef. J. Cole inserted himself into the conversation and then immediately backed away. He released a diss track, then called it the lamest he ever did, apologized on stage, and deleted the song. Then months later, released another song accusing critics of wanting blood and clicks. He framed his retreat as taking the high road. But he was the one who jumped in the feud in the first place. I was never a really big fan of J. Cole, but I do enjoy some of his music. I definitely cringe whenever I hear any kind of contradictory bars, but they're just words. There isn't any kind of direct harm. Therefore, this does make him one of the easiest artists for me to attempt to try to separate their actions from their music. Next up, we have Ice Cube. Few artists have built a more militant, uncompromising image than Ice Cube. From Fuck the Police to The Predator, his brand was built on refusing to bow to power. However, he went from saying, "I'll never have dinner with the president," to actually having dinner with the president, or at least having a meeting with him. In 2018, he lobbied at the Trump White House to protect athletes in his basketball league, the Big Three. In 2020, he released a contract with Black America and worked with the Trump campaign on their Platinum Plan. In 2024, he announced that the Big Three would stream its games exclusively on X, the platform owned by Elon Musk, who had been widely criticized for allowing hate speech and anti-Semitic content to flourish on the app. When fans called him out for aligning with Musk, Cube fired back with, "Shut your up." Now, is any of this a crime? No, it's politics and business, or hypocrisy depending on how you see it. He's allowed to make those choices. But the man who rapped, "I'll never have dinner with the president," had dinner with the president. Now he's partnering with a billionaire who is definitely a white nationalist. That's why he is second on the spectrum. Not the easiest to separate because no one was harmed, but the hypocrisy definitely hurts. So far, we've talked about artists whose actions were mostly opinions, words, contradictions. No one was directly affected. But now we move into a different category. These next artists, their actions directly affected other people. This isn't about beliefs anymore. This is about direct action against others. Third is Chris Brown. He was once seen as the future of R&B, a teenage sensation with smooth vocals, sharp choreography, and crossover pop appeal. But his music has nothing to do with what he did. He doesn't sing about assault. His pattern of violence, though, extends past the 2009 incident with Rihanna. In 2013, he punched a man outside a Washington, D.C. hotel, breaking his nose and after making homophobic remarks about him trying to join a fan photo. He later pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. The same year, he was charged with felony assault after a brawl with Frank Ocean over a parking spot, and a member of his entourage used a homophobic slur. And in 2016, he was arrested for allegedly pulling a gun out on a woman during a standoff with police at his home. In 2017, he assaulted a club photographer, splitting his lip. And as recently as 2023, he was accused of attacking a music producer with a bottle at a London nightclub. There's actually a laundry list of different examples of him displaying this behavior, but for time purposes, I only picked a few. This isn't one incident. It's a pattern spanning nearly 2 decades. The thing is, I'm not really a huge Chris Brown fan, so I wouldn't really be missing anything. That's why it would be easier for me to separate his actions from his music because I don't have a deep connection to it. My sister, on the other hand, was a really big Chris Brown fan, so he may land somewhere differently on this spectrum for her. Fourth is Prince. He was a once-in-a-generation genius, a virtuoso who blended rock, funk, soul into something entirely on his own. But his legacy is complicated. In 1990, he met Mayte Garcia. She was 16. He was 32. She moved into his compound at 17 with her parents signing over legal guardianship. Their sexual relationship, though, allegedly began when she was 19. She has written about this openly, and Prince never denied it. The inappropriate age gap with him and his wife is not the only issue. There are multiple allegations about Prince being abusive from several of his ex-girlfriends. From my knowledge, Prince does not have any music about pursuing underage girls or being abusive. That doesn't make things any less complicated, though. But since I grew up being more of a Michael Jackson fan than a Prince fan, it's a little easier for me to separate his actions from his music than someone like Michael Jackson. Next up is Marvin Gaye. He had one of the most beautiful voices in soul and is considered as one of the most influential voices in the 20th century. But his legacy is a little tangled. In 1973, he met Janice Hunter. He was 34. She was 17. Marvin was still married to Berry Gordy's daughter. Janice was a high school student. Their affair began immediately. They had 2 children before his divorce was even finalized. Janice later described physical and psychological abuse. Gaye had a pattern of manipulation, infidelity, and violence. And unfortunately, some of the art mirrors his actions. We all consider Let's Get It On as a sensual masterpiece, but no one stops to think that the song was released the same year he met the teenager. With information like that, it's always been hard for me to look at the song the same way. I love Marvin Gaye's music, but it's just harder for me to separate his actions from his music based on the nature of his music. Sixth is Michael Jackson. He was the biggest pop star on the planet, a once-in-a-lifetime talent whose music defined generations. But his legacy is deeply, deeply contested. Multiple accusers, consistent stories of grooming and abuse, a pattern that has spanned over decades. He was never convicted, though. But for me, the evidence is very credible. Here's what makes him different from the other artists at the end of my spectrum. His music was never explicitly about sex. Billie Jean is about a false paternity claim, not child abuse. Thriller, Beat It, Man in the Mirror, none of them describe or really celebrate what he was accused of. The art doesn't really mirror the action. The one song that I did have an eyebrow raised at was Human Nature, but after I learned that the song was written by Steve Porcaro of Toto, it eased my mind a little bit about the nature of the song. Yet, I grew up on his music. The first song I learned to play guitar on was Smooth Criminal. I enjoyed his music even though I had a fear of him until the day he died. That deep childhood personal connection is what makes separation so painful, even though the music stands apart. He lands on the harder half not because his lyrics are the crime, but because I remember what he was accused of. That's what separates Michael Jackson from the remaining 2 artists on this spectrum. The harm isn't just their actions, it's also in the music. 7th on the spectrum is Kanye West. He was a visionary producer, rapper, and fashion designer, a creative force who changed hip-hop and streetwear forever. But when people talk about separating the art from the artist, his later works become a flashpoint. Because with Kanye, the harm isn't just his actions, it's in the music itself. He has a long history of misogynistic and anti-Black statements. He seems to court controversy on purpose, wearing a White Lives Matter shirt, praising Hitler, calling slavery a choice, and he's put all of it directly into his lyrics. How Hitler, I'm a Nazi, songs where he wears the label as a badge of honor. The art doesn't just accompany the action, it is the action. I have a personal connection to his earlier work. Graduation, Late Registration, those albums shaped my taste in music. But the new music is not even good enough to consider separating. There's no tension, no loss. I just don't listen to it. For me, separation is not an option for anything he's made since his public unraveling. Not because I'm sad about losing the art, but because the art itself became a weapon of hate. Kanye firmly lands in the harder half. The old music survives, the new music does not. 8th and finally on our spectrum today is R.Kelly. He was one of the most successful R&B songwriters and producers of his era. A man who wrote and produced hit after hit for himself, for Aaliyah, and for countless others. But when people talk about separating the art from the artist, his name comes up immediately because his music isn't just connected to his crimes. It is the crime. Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, a song he wrote about a 15-year-old Aaliyah whom he secretly married when she was just that age. Bump and Grind, a song about wanting sex despite someone's refusal. And then there's Mr. Biggs. Around 1995, R.Kelly created the Mr. Biggs character for soul legend Ronald Isley of the Isley Brothers. In the videos and story songs, Mr. Biggs was a wealthy, powerful older man, a high roller with unlimited sexual needs, who was often in romantic competition with R. Kelly's younger, brasher character. The lyrics were full of anxieties about infidelity, twisted desire, and transactional relationships. Kelly wrote and produced 11 of the 12 tracks on the Isley Brothers' 2003 album, Body Kiss, and the character became so dominant that Isley later admitted, "I probably won't be able to get rid of it." Kelly was convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking. He used his fame and his staff to recruit and abuse young girls, sometimes even on video. And he got away with it for nearly 30 years, protected by record labels, bodyguards, and a culture that looked the other way. The Mr. Biggs character wasn't just a persona he created for an icon. It was a confession in disguise, a window into how he saw power, sex, and the older man's pursuit of younger women. For me, separation is not an option. I am disgusted by what he did, disgusted that his music, including the characters he wrote for others, was a confession we all heard and still played, disgusted that he evaded accountability for so long. There's no nostalgia that can override what R. Kelly did, and that's why he lands here on my spectrum. This is one that I don't even wrestle with. I just walk away. So that's my spectrum. 8 artists. We've gone from opinions and contradictions, J. Cole's bars, Ice Cube's hypocrisy, all the way to direct actions that harmed others, and finally to art that is the action itself, like Kanye's lyrics or R. Kelly's songs. Some are easy to separate, while some are impossible, and there are some who are in the messy middle. But here's what I really want to talk about. How people use separating the art from the artist as a scapegoat. A new allegation comes out, and instead of sitting with the discomfort, people are quick to say, but the music is good. They separate not because they've thought it through, but because they don't want to give up something that they love. They pride themselves on being loyal fans, as if sticking by someone after they've been exposed as an abuser is a virtue. That's the real problem. It's not about whether you can separate. It's about whether you're using separation to avoid accountability. You can't profess to stand with victims and continue to support artists like nothing happened. That's not separation. That's denial. Let me be honest, under capitalism, there is no such thing as ethical consumption. Your phone was made with exploited labor, your clothes come from sweatshops. We all make compromises. So I'm not here to tell you that still listening to R. Kelly makes you a bad person. But if you really want to listen to the music of problematic artists, just be honest about it. And if you really want to try to be ethical, just pirate the music. Don't give them their money. Don't give them your streams. Don't put money into their estate's pockets. There are ways to enjoy art without funding the harm. The point of this video wasn't to give you a clean answer, but to show you my messy one. And to ask you, when you hit play, are you separating it because you thought it through, or are you just looking for an excuse?